Election season in the United States never ends.
You keep thinking election night is over. I know.
The US is not a parliamentary system like the United Kingdom or Canada. In the US, we don't just call an election, they happen at regular intervals. Every 2 years, each and every House seat is up for grabs, and some Senate seats as well. On odd-numbered years, there are still elections, just not as many. The presidential election happens every 4 years, but the election season, as it is called, does not begin on the year of the election. It begins much sooner. Arguably, it begins the moment after the midterms, but if we were to give ourselves a chance to breathe here, we could argue that it truly begins and starts to form in the public consciousness on the night of the first primary debate. Politicians start campaigning and fundraising months before this, but the public at large starts to pay closer attention on debate night. That is August 23rd for the Republicans, less than a month from the time this video will premiere. The build-up to the election of November 5th, 2024 starts in the summer of the year before. Even after the election is over, the aftermath persists a little longer, at least long enough to have to discuss the matter with your ideologically opposed relatives at Thanksgiving, only a few weeks later, which makes the election season that much more stressful because you know you're going to have to talk about it, possibly while drunk, to an uncle that you only see once a year. Every second of every day of that 14.5-month period between the debates and election day is stuffed to bursting with attack ads, propaganda, and the most obnoxious human interactions you will ever encounter. Conservatives tell everyone within the sound of their loud, brainwashed voices that we need to have armed poll watchers so that the spendocrats can't rig the election, with a secret plot that was devised deep within the transgender mafia. If you haven't noticed, conservatives are even louder than they were before 2016, and far more willing to intimidate voters like the whole country is a segregated South in the 1950s. They have to, or else all caps Antifa will win. Liberals, whether hypnotized by the cloying patriotism of the West Wing or the milquetoast late-night comedy politics of Stephen Colbert, chastise their neighbors for not voting blue down ticket and wet their pants over invented boogeymen like Bernie Bros and Susan Sarandon. In the US, if there is one thing liberals hate, it's anything to their right. And if there is one thing that liberals hate even more than anything to their right, it's anything to their left. Liberals in the US love the slow march towards progress, especially when they march in place and not forward. I'm a political YouTuber, which means following the goings-on of the representative republic operating within the norms of liberal democracy and neoliberal capitalism is part of my job. I'm also an anarchist YouTuber, which means following the goings-on of the representative republic operating within the norms of liberal democracy and neoliberal capitalism is emotionally f***ing exhausting. People in the US are convinced that voting will set us free, but voting really just chooses the less offensive option among multiple offensive options. In the US, that's almost always just two. If I may cut something off before it hits the comments section, no, this is not some South Park reference. No, this is not about the sandwich and the other thing. Please stop adopting right libertarian politics from a show that started in the know-nothing 90s on Comedy Central. I swear, every time I talk about the lack of real choices, someone makes this reference. The creators of that mostly bad show with some good episodes have fairly ordinary politics that could align well enough with one of the two major political parties in the United States. Stop pretending that this reference is some act of defiance. There is nothing radical about it. No, the options are always offensive because the conceit of voting for which party will have more sway in the government is that we're always voting for the continuation of the state. The government is temporary, the state is permanent, and we don't get to vote for not having leaders. There is no option on the ballot to radically reorganize society. Why would there be? It doesn't serve the state to do so. We don't get to vote for the world we want. We get to vote for limited options within our current status quo. That is why changing society outside of the realm of electoral politics is meaningful to leftists, whereas voting is sacrosanct to liberals. That does not mean that leftists in the United States never vote, as there is a lot of data that says that they do, but it does mean that leftists cannot be convinced that voting will be the thing that sets us free. The world that leftists want, whether anarchist, Marxist-Leninist, or what have you, is simply not on the ballot. Social democrats don't count, as they only want a social democracy that enriches a nation but still leaves the global south in poverty. That's not socialism. Social Democrats are just mixed economy capitalists. Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are not advocating anything radical. They're advocating for a more European style of the social safety net. They're better than most, not trying to throw them under the bus here, but they're not revolutionaries. Historically, the biggest changes in society happen outside of the ballot box, not from voting for a candidate who is better than most. Whenever something bad happens, the Democrats say, "Vote!" Okay, sure, but for what? When the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, Democrats raised funds and campaigned on that issue. The makeup of a city council and state senate, as well as who sits in a governor's chair, absolutely can help or hurt local reproductive rights. But on the national level, not a whole lot has been done. President Joe Biden seems unenthusiastic about this, knowing that the pro-choice position is important to his party, but also that it's a dangerous subject at the best of times. By his own admission, his Catholic faith is in opposition, and because of that, he's not big on it. The House and Senate, even when under control by the Democratic Party, didn't make many big moves and have big victories on this issue, and that is even less likely now that the House is under Republican control. The most that another Biden term will give us on this front is the possibility of pro-life Supreme Court justices retiring or passing away, and Biden choosing pro-choice justices as replacement, leading the way for a reversal of the reversal. Considering it took conservative justices almost 50 years to reverse Roe v. Wade, we should not have any expectations of the court striking down Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health anytime soon, no matter how hard we vote. It's also particularly galling to hear Democrats shout, "Vote," when our interests do not actually align. Vote for what? Your thing? What about our thing? Leftists are far more likely to side with liberals than conservatives in the United States due to some of our shared positions on social issues and some other domestic issues more broadly. But this is not an alliance and certainly not a merger. There's nothing in writing. Our stark differences between our visions of the future create a deeply obnoxious argument. Liberals think that they are owed leftist votes, and when the left says that's not true, liberals consider it treason even though leftists never pledged loyalty to them in the first place. Leftists are not bending the knee to liberals by opposing Donald Trump. Leftists would oppose Donald Trump even if the Democratic Party did not exist. We're not part of the same party or ideology, we just happen to have our interests aligned on a few topics. Similarly, liberals have not pledged loyalty to the actual left, but liberals are never called traitors when they consistently advocate for their ideology. Why is this? Liberals have decided that they are in charge because liberals love voting so much that they think something that was not a vote still counts as a vote because of majority rule. It has the appearance of voting. Basically, there are more liberals than socialists in the US due to a century of anti-socialist propaganda, especially during the Cold War. There aren't even a lot of social democrats in the nation, like there are in Europe. To liberals, that means socialist votes are subject to liberal demands, and if socialists don't vote for liberalism, socialists are betraying liberalism, an ideology that they do not actually advocate. If socialists were to ask liberals to vote for a socialist, liberals would laugh. And when liberals ask socialists to vote for a liberal, they expect obedience because of their numbers. Just to be clear, this is not like in some countries when two or more parties create a strong formal coalition to defeat another party and incorporate some of their respective policy proposals into the platform and place some representatives of their parties into positions of power. No. The Democratic Party does not create a strong coalition with barely existing leftist political parties in the United States, nor do they adopt anti-capitalist policy proposals or install real independent leftist political figures. Instead, the Democratic Party passively allows an informal expectation of the left that does not include leftist politics, in hopes that leftists will still vote for the Democratic Party by default. Liberals say, "Do it our way, or a Republican could get elected," which has the power dynamics of a hostage situation. When liberals lose elections, the left is blamed. Liberals say, "Look what the left did to us." When liberals win elections, they say, "See, we didn't need the left." There is no outcome to any election in the United States in which the Democratic Party acknowledges votes from communists and thanks them for their grudging support. If the Democrat wins, the most that the left gets is not a Republican, and is then discarded, ignored, and mocked, at least until the next election when the left is needed but somehow also not needed. It is always the leftists who are accused in the media of ruining the alliance, even though there is no real alliance and the disagreement is on both sides. Our capitalist media will favor voices from those who support capitalism. When the schism is discussed in the news anchor is almost always a garden variety voter in one of the two major political parties, and the guests are almost always elected officials in one of the two major parties. Sometimes Cornel West shows up, but that's about it.
You can be hostile to concentration of wealth. You can be hostile to income inequality. You can be hostile to greed. We can't be hostile to the free enterprise system.
The news media is not incentivized to portray the schism in any other way except the one that makes liberals the victims of leftists, even though the power dynamics are far, far more in favor of the liberals. Thus, a narrative can be written about leftists stabbing liberals in the back, when in reality the minority of leftists in the US are simply trying to allow their ideology to survive amid the major parties that have been openly hostile to them for about 100 years. In summary, some see leftists in the nation as part of the Democratic Party's voting bloc in the way that the Republican Party has come to see the far right as their voting bloc, but it's more complicated than that. The Republican Party caters some of their platform to the far right, especially lately, but the Democratic Party does not cater some of its platform to the far left. If you're a Republican about to object to this, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be condescending, but the only way someone can think that the Biden administration is far left is that someone doesn't know the difference between liberalism and communism. Liberalism is a capitalist ideology. If you're an American and you consider yourself anti-capitalist and a liberal, you are at most one of those things, but not both. If we were to use the admittedly simplistic political compass, liberalism would be here, near the center. Some might argue that liberalism is actually closer to here in the lower right quadrant, but for the sake of not having everyone's brain exploding in the comments section, let's just give them the center. The far left would either be in one of the two left quadrants, depending on which flavor of sweet, sweet communism tastes best to varying communists. The Democratic Party is not far left. I am. Republican voters think that the Democratic Party is far left because of the aforementioned century of anti-communist propaganda and modern-day Republican politicians telling them so.
For all of the baseless commotion about undue outside influence, Senate Democrats have proven themselves to be quite thoroughly influenced by the far left's most notorious dark money advocates and discredited cause. Our colleagues understand what the far left expects of them. They know that their party's base has long since discarded any desire to achieve its goals from within our institutions.
Politicians on the right have pulled off a trick where the political compass is only the upper right quadrant. From this perspective, the Democratic Party appears on the left, and the Republican Party appears in the center, but that's just obfuscation. The Republican Party is full of conservatives, and sometimes worse. And the Democratic Party platform is not anarcho-communism. Anarcho-communism is simply not on the ballot. Even in terms of social movements, the Democratic Party is always slow to join with these movements that scare Republicans so much. That's why the Stonewall riots were in 1969, but Obergefell v. Hodges didn't happen until 2015. It happened because of decades of protest, activism, legal challenges by LGBT rights groups, and only reluctantly adopted by the Democrats decades after Stonewall. It was then rubber-stamped by the Supreme Court. Not that the fight is over, but the victories in this fight were accomplished by activists, not the Democratic Party. Barack Obama ran in opposition to marriage equality in 2008, and only came out in favor of this years later, and only because Joe Biden perhaps accidentally beat him to it. Obama did not give us marriage equality. Sorry. Democrats are terrified about making trans rights a central issue in their campaigns because the polling is new and Democrats are still learning about the thing that they ostensibly support in abstract but not concrete terms, at least compared to the Republicans. Democrats will never adopt police abolition as part of their platform. When the much more watered-down version, defund the police, was broached by the people, not the party, the big shots in the Democratic Party discussed it and rejected it. Abolishing the modern centralized police, even gradually, is not on the ballot either.
We should all agree the answer is not to defund the police, it's to fund the police. Fund them. Fund them.
The presidential election season is upon us again. Every day when I'm not writing, recording, or editing, I watch the news, I read books, I read radical zines, and keep my eye on social media to get the general pulse of the people. In the year and a half before a presidential election, that pulse starts to jump up. I was born in Baltimore, but I've lived in Philadelphia for the past 5 years. Not a bad city, honestly. The rent is just okay, but the food is very good. Unfortunately, I live close to a section of the city with a lot of MAGA hat enthusiasts. For my own safety, I'm not going to narrow it down too much, but there are a lot of neighborhoods like that, such as Fishtown near Central City, parts of South Philly for sure, and the northeastern tip of the city called Somerton, where cops live that may as well be Bensalem but isn't Bensalem. I'm sure this is very interesting to people not living in Philly. Anyway, I don't actually live in any of those places, but I live near one of them. When I drive a couple miles down the road, there is a barrage of signs for Republican candidates, oftentimes Donald Trump himself. It troubles me, but I have a way of dealing with it that I can't really talk about on YouTube. Pennsylvania law says that the only people who can remove a sign are the campaigns that placed it, the owner of the property, law enforcement, or highway crews. So, I definitely do not steal and/or destroy right-wing political propaganda in my neighborhood. Nope, not me. Not this guy. Incidentally, campaign signs are typically made of corrugated plastic polypropylene, also called a fluted polypropylene sheet. It's made of that material because it's resistant to inclement weather. The downside to this material is that it is highly flammable. Anyway, it's particularly troubling for leftists in the US during this time because we both do and do not have a dog in this race. We do because we know what happens when the right wing has power, and we do not because we're not really Democrats, except perhaps on paper so we can vote in the primaries and perform harm reduction. I don't do that because I'm not registered with either party. I think my little card says I'm an independent, so I don't get to do that. Some anarchists do not vote out of principle, and that's hard to argue against, so I won't. But for me personally, my polling place is quite literally across the street from me, and there has never been a line for as long as I've lived here. I'm also self-employed, and I can just decide whether or not I have time that day to do something. It's a position of some privilege, because that is not standard operating procedure everywhere. I don't have a good reason not to vote when it takes about 3 minutes every 2 years. I would end up wasting more energy actively avoiding doing it, and at some point you can just feel too contrarian about the whole thing. I will not claim that there are no consequences to this election. Even as an anarchist who wants something besides electoralism and representatives guiding our fate, I'm also just a person living in the world, and everything has consequences. Everything. Will things fall apart more gradually and give the nation and the world a little more time to get its act together? Or will things fall apart explosively and more dangerously? I'm not being snide or cynical about this. These are real concerns. I hope everyone understands that, because there is a good chance that there will be a fair amount of videos on the subject leading up to and immediately following the presidential election next year. I will not be doing some rundown or review of the first debate because my patrons asked me not to. Good call, but there will be more. The next year and a half has the potential for catastrophe after catastrophe, even if it ends with arguably the better of two scenarios. Let's brace ourselves.